Okay, hello everyone, and welcome to the event for today. My name is Handel Wright, and I'm a professor in the Department of Educational Studies, and I'm also the director of the Center for Culture, Identity, and Education, which is hosting today's event. The center hosts a number of different kinds of events, and its work is about the intersection of cultural studies and progressive forms of education. And so we deal with issues of theory and popular culture, social justice in general, and issues of representation. We hold webinars on several different kinds of issues. We've done film screenings, but this is a new event for us that we've kind of put together, and it's been wonderful to work with folks who've been involved in this. So we titled today's event, Making Space for Africa and Approaches to Diversity, Representation, and Social Justice, starting with a book collection. And the event arose because two professors who are emeritus and emerita from UBC and from SFU have very kindly and very, very generously going to make a donation of their library, their combined library to UBC, principally to the UBC library system, but also to a few books to the Center for Cultural Identity and Education. And so what we're going to do in today's sort of small intimate event is to have the two professors present about their work, because both have been outstanding scholars in the fields of South African scholarship, African scholarship, issues of social justice generally, multiculturalism, et cetera, leaders in those fields. And I'll introduce them in a little while. And then they will each speak about their work, the collection that they're donating. And then I'm also really thrilled that the university librarian, Dr. Susan Parker, is also with us and has agreed to say a few words on behalf of the UBC library system. And we'll end with me saying a few words just to thank everybody and to thank the professors for donating their collection to UBC. So without too much more ado, I want to introduce Professors Handel-Moodley and Professor Herbert Adam, and then later Susan Parker. So I'll introduce each of you, and then you can speak, and then I'll introduce the next speaker. So I'll start with Professor Moodley. Professor Moodley is Professor Emerita of Sociology at the University of British Columbia, Professor Emerita, and where she was the first holder of the David Lamb Chair in Multicultural Education. So she preceded me. I mean, I was also a David Lamb Chair of Multicultural Education. She has served as president of the International Sociology Association's Research Committee on Ethnic, Minority, and Racial Relations, and has also served on the editorial board of several journals, including Ethnic and Racial Studies. For over a decade, she was annually affiliated with the University of Cape Town Center for African Studies. Throughout, the focus of her research continues to be on xenophobia, political education, and comparative multiculturalism. During 2011 and 2012, she was a fellow at the Stellenbosch Institute for Advanced Studies, where together with Herbert Adam, they completed a comparative study of xenophobia in South Africa. Her books, both co-authored and single-authored, include South Africa Without Apartheid, published by University of California Press in 1986, Beyond Multicultural Education, The Opening of the Apartheid Mind, Comrades in Business, Post-Liberation Politics in South Africa, Seeking Mandela, Peacemaking Between Israelis and Palestinians, that was published by Temple University in 2005. And actually, part of this whole event occurred because we were in touch with one another because she has recently published another book. And the first idea was to say, you know, maybe we could have some discussion about her book, and that I'm really interested in getting to read. Her most recent book, which reflects on a global journey from South Africa, is titled Race, Culture, and Politics in Education, published by Teachers College Press in this year, 2021. With that as something of an introduction, though in the Faculty of Education, Professor Moodley has absolutely no need of an introduction, but that as something of an introduction, I now invite you to Kogila, if you can say some words about your work and about the collection.
Thank you very much, Handel, for those very generous words. It makes me feel quite old. I want to say, you said 10 minutes. It's not very long to talk about my life's work, but I thought I would begin by saying, first of all, what a great honor it is for us to share a lifetime's research collection with the university. And I'm very grateful to you and to Dr. Parker for the acceptance of this material. Of course, many would say that a lot of this material can be obtained online. Maybe not. But I do believe, and we do believe, that there is no substitute for books. It's really important for people to be able to peruse a shelf, to discover new sources, to find the unexpected. And it's an invaluable resource to have those hard copies in my old-fashioned view of the world. It would be a pity if these were to remain in our private domain when so many others could benefit from it. So I want to say these books have meant a lot to us. And I want to do that by introducing a little bit of a personal story, how we came to work together, how we came to start working in this area at all. We got to know one another in the heart of an institution which was fashioned by apartheid to keep people apart. All post-secondary institutions at a certain point were meant to be both racially and ethnically distinctive and separate from one another. Having no other alternative at that point, I was teaching sociology at the University for Indians, which was called the University College. In my role as a sociology lecturer, I was asked by the white head of department if this visiting German scholar could speak to one of my classes. At that point, we were very intent on mobilizing that any foreigner came, we had to give them our side of the story. So with that in mind and great skepticism, I listened to this foreign scholar who eventually happened to be my husband. And from the way in which he talked about things, I could tell right away that he had a very critical awareness of what was going on in the country. The sources he cited told me a lot that most other people not knowing would not be able to detect. Now, from those beginnings, a relationship developed. It developed as a forbidden relationship because under apartheid, we were working under an Immorality Act. And the Immorality Act made it an imprisonable offense to have any kind of personal relationship with a person of another color. So very soon it became known that however discreet we were, that we were opponents, strong opponents of apartheid. How could one not be? However, that was the beginning of our journey. It wasn't long before I was fired from my job. Heribert was not allowed to enter the country. He had to be banned from re-entering the country. And it's a long story, so I'm cutting the details out. But this led us eventually to leave South Africa. I had nowhere to go then. And our journey took us to Germany, United States, Egypt, we lived in for 2 years, and finally Canada as part of that whole journey. The sequence is not always great here. Our mission was to document, to analyze, and study how it was that in each of these situations we entered, in each place, race, skin color, culture, religion were used as criteria to divide and rule. And power, privilege, and discrimination were organized along those lines. Those were the beginnings of a continued work in the area. And Heribert made a very important contribution at that stage in his work called Modernizing Racial Domination. The question was, at the time in South Africa, it seemed the only option was revolution and the bloodbath. It seemed like there was very little potential for a peaceful transition. But the process changed over time and many other intervening variables came into play. So what our books document are the kinds of thought processes that went into the gradual transformation of that society into something which was considered inconceivable at that time, and the way in which change took place. So these books document the various perspectives involved in that transitional process. It amazes one when you look through to think how people were so generous, they were so rational, they were arguing about what would be peaceful ways to bring about this change. How is it possible? Then there are two major streams. One was the perspective of people like Mandela and the African National Congress, which made the case for non-racialism. That is, we should include in the opposition all of those people who are opposed to apartheid, regardless of the skin color or their position of privilege in the past. That seemed to dominate one series of writers committed to that view. Then there was the view of people like Steve Biko, who also validly made the case for why it was important to engage in a period in Black consciousness. That is, to lift people out of the condition of depredation and demeaning treatment they had faced their entire lives into one where they could see themselves as whole and work from a position of their own advancing causes and promoting change from another perspective. Now that's very broadly, there are more nationalist perspectives and so on. And I want to just outline that this library that we have documents that step very carefully from a range of perspectives. It really lifts one's sense of hope in a way that human beings could think so rationally, that they had to live ultimately in a world where oppressor and oppressed had to live together. So before I bring this to an end, I want to say, so what does this have to do with Canada? What does it have to do with the rest of the world? Race and racism are very, very strong issues today worldwide. And I think what the South African situation has to contribute to that is the importance of understanding that mere representation of people, mere use of changed labeling is not enough, that we really need to understand how all of the dimensions need to come together to give equitable power to those differences, and how we can do that in a way that builds a society that we want to live in together. And from that point of view, I would very much hope that this collection of books will document in a very realistic way, within a time span, what each of those contributions have made in the past. Okay, I'll end there and let the rest of you go on.
Thank you so very much, Kogi. It's wonderful not only to see you, but to hear you again. You've led the way in some of the work that some of us have done, including around critical takes on multiculturalism, and indeed on in positions and ideas of representation, as you so put it. It's not just about language, the discourse of representation, but about the politics of it, the actual things that happen. And the connection with Canada and with South Africa right now resonates so much for me through what we're going through with COVID, and how easily people have been able to label the whole of Southern Africa as being somehow potentially infectious to Canada. I think that's another kind of way in which race and racism is playing out. But I'll move on to Heribert. It's kind of interesting. I know both of you well, and I have to use these formal names. Instead of saying Harry, I will say Professor Heribert Adam. And Professor Adam is a fellow of the Royal Society of Canada and the co-author or the author of 11 books on ethnic conflict in divided societies, Truth Commissions, Reconciliation and Politics of Memory, Xenophobia and Nationalism. Some 6 co-authored books were written together with his spouse, Handel, as well as dozens of articles and book chapters. In 1986, Mandela in prison read their book, the book they co-wrote, South Africa Without Apartheid, and thanked them with a long handwritten letter. I know this to be true because I've seen a copy of it. And it's a wonderful document. And I'm not 100% sure yet, but I'm angling for the possibility of that being donated to the CCIE. And if it is, then I think it might be framed and put up somewhere in our space. But that's continued negotiation. 10 years later, they included a third author, their close friend, F. Van Zyl Slabbert, also a sociologist and former leader of the parliamentary anti-apartheid opposition, in their study Comrades in Business, which assailed the beginning corruption of the ANC, the pervasive consumerism of the new elite, and the HIV/AIDS denialism of the ruling party. Professor Adams' approach is rooted in the tradition of critical theory, always comparative, nuanced, and events analyzed in their historical context. In this vein, he explored not only lessons from South Africa's negotiated revolution, but Germany's fascist past with the Nazi genocide, the legacy of settler colonialism in different imperial conquests, and the ongoing intractable Israeli-Palestinian conflict portrayed in the 2005 book, Seeking Mandela. The study argues against placing hope in a single leader. Now a professor emeritus at Simon Fraser University, Adam is the recipient of several awards, including the 1998 Adenauer Prize of the German Humboldt Foundation, the annual 2006 Outstanding Achievement Award of the Canadian Sociology Association, and the SFU 2008 Sterling Prize. Professor Adam is now working on an academic autobiography. So Harry, you want to say a few words?
Thank you very much, Handel, for your lovely introduction, and thank you, Kogila, for your eloquent outline, which I fully endorse, and Dr. Parker for actually making it possible that we could give you the books to UBC. And I want to let you know that 6 months ago, I explored the possibility, since I taught for 35 years at SFU from 68 onwards, wouldn't SFU library have that collection? And the answer I got is, we are much more interested in local issues. Not South Africa is far away, and Africa had basically been wiped out from the news table. And no, they were not interested. And I thought SFU had become rather parochial, and gave it up to pursue that further. And so we are particularly happy that we could contribute, and Handel made that possible, to UBC. Now, let me add a few snippets to my role in that writing and collection. And you can imagine, I mean, we are together for 56 years, and we not only have written together, we argue together. And I want to let you into some arguments we have, and ongoing arguments. But first of all, I come from the Frankfurt School. Critical theory. Critical theory is actually a disguise for Marxism. But not the Marxism of the Leninist, the orthodox Marxism of the Leninist communist parties, but of a new left, which the Frankfurt School had before that term even was invented. And my thesis, which was suggested by Adorno, or basically imposed by Adorno on me, was something which was actually inspired by their return from exile from the States to Germany in from 52, 53 onwards. I started there as an undergraduate in 56, and then was for 4 years an assistant among 4 underlings of Adorno, very patriarchal hierarchy with Horkheimer as a super hierarch, and we underlings, it was like the Catholic Church from whom I escaped a strict hierarchy we had to follow. Obsequience and so on was fostered. But what interested me actually, since I had missed the Nazis of the real Nazis of Germany. I was 9 years when my father, for the last time, returned from the Russian front and for a short holiday. And in 45, when the war ended, I was 9 years. And we were bombed out. We had all the post-war experiences. And I came to, and I wanted to study the Nazis of Africa. Now, why South Africa? At the time, I had this very serious girlfriend, and her father, a potential father-in-law, was part of that South African Nazi elite, actually, which were imprisoned during the war, not the ones who fought with the Allies against the Germans. And after long arguments, the father-in-law said to me, "You can't judge South Africa without actually being there." And so he organized a 6 months tour of South Africa, 2 geographers and me as one sociologist, to study South Africa. And the first thing when we arrived in Pretoria was that they went off to a game reserve. And I said, I'm not here to go to a game reserve. I want to study. Okay, you stay here. And that began my reading in South African literature. But they also connected me with a wide variety of their associates, which I then turned around and used their contacts to get my data. And I made a survey which they distributed among parliamentarians and English business people, and particularly the civil service. And that gave me an insight in the thinking of the power elite at the time. And then our journey to what we called then the Bush colleges started, the tribal universities, which just had been formatted, and I landed in Durban. And Kogila told that story nicely. It was a struggle. I tried to give in that atmosphere my thoughts on the authoritarian personality on which Adorno had become famous, and argued actually after a while that what happened in Afrikanerdom, that at least among the intellectuals, that secret society, the Broederbond, which ruled the country, were only Afrikaans-speaking whites who ruled the country, not even English-speaking amongst them, was different from the fascists we studied in Frankfurt. It was different in the case that they were much more opportunistic. They were not so dogmatic. If there had been a Jewish Mandela in Germany, they would have never negotiated with a Jewish Mandela. And so there was some things which I sensed could be useful for an evolutionary non-violent transformation, namely to delegitimize that system as much as possible, inside and outside. There was a large liberal camp of whites and Indians and so-called coloreds, mixed race groups, which were all anti-apartheid, but they were dominated. And that led even a lot of arguments among us. Kogi says, when I talk to these Broederbonders, you're giving just comfort to the oppressor. I said, no, I want to penetrate their thinking. I want to know their minds. I want to see the cleavages within their camp and use that. And so that's what our book collection demonstrated, namely the anti-violent opposition and delegitimizing of apartheid by what in South Africa at least was what was called liberalism. And what else can I say? I had made a few notes. When we perhaps in comparison, when we then said what lessons can we draw from that peaceful handover of power? But South Africa, the whites were not defeated. There was a stalemate. And if they had 5 atomic bombs, which they developed in collaboration with Israel, they gave it up. That was the only state which gave up these bombs and surrendered it. They had actually, after the Cold War ended, they were more powerful than they were before. And even there was pressure, there were sanctions, and there was also occasional military action, but the military action of the ANC and of others were very limited. And we got to know both camps' leaders. I asked, for instance, the leader of the Communist Party, Joe Slovo, at one stage, tell me, Joe, when does the second phase of the 2-stage revolution start? And he said quite realistically, not in your and in my lifetime. And yet there are still people dogmatically in South Africa, in the ANC, who says we need the second stage of the revolution, and that will be a racial revolution, a racial war. And our experience is quite different. There is an enormous groundswell of goodwill on all sides, in all groups. And that goodwill, I think, will assert itself if a number of preconditions can also be fulfilled. And one lesson I want to draw from all these experiences, and it may sound quite naive, I concluded the ends, the just ends never justify unjust means. In other words, even if a just war is fought, there could be injustice in war. And the Truth Commission had an enormous conflict to be accepted by the ANC. Also, Mandela was a great supporter of the Truth Commission, because Mbeki, Mandela's successor, argued that you criminalize the ANC by also investigating their human rights violations. And Tutu said to Mbeki, if you refuse to accept this Truth Commission report, which was fair and exposed the atrocities on all sides during the anti-apartheid war, then I resign, Tutu said. And finally, Mbeki gave in. And that was also a triumph of a principle which we must uphold everywhere, that the ends never justify, the means shall never justify, or the end never justifies inhuman, unjust means. That's I learned from Frankfurt. Thank you.
Thanks so much for that. Your recalling of the Frankfurt School again makes that connection, because the Center for Culture, Identity and Education is very much about cultural studies. And of course, cultural studies has that connection with critical theory. And I'm just writing an essay to present tomorrow about on Raymond Williams, in which I'm arguing in some ways about doing Marxist work, but also at the same time, sometimes running against the grain of traditional Marxist thought. So, and both of you have raised a lot of issues about the South African situation in particular. But a lot of your collection, Kogila mentioned a little bit of this, also covers the Middle East. There's a lot of books that you're going to be donating, which covers the Middle East as well. And a lot of work around multiculturalism, from Kogila's own work to other works as well. And entire sets of journals, entire issues. I think this is all, I think, very, very generous of you and very important for UBC. I had not necessarily worked with libraries before, but it's becoming interesting and important for me to make that connection. In my other role as senior advisor to the president on anti-racism and inclusive excellence, I've been working with the library to look at what our collections are on a topic like anti-racism and how we can improve that collection. And I think sometimes there's this kind of disconnect. As academics, we want to work with the library just to get some books, and the library does its own thing and academics do their own thing. And I think under Dr. Susan Parker, that kind of relationship is being strengthened. The kind of discussions between the two, I think, it's happening in a much more interesting and fulfilling manner. And so I was just very thrilled when we tried to reach out, and the UBC librarian herself, Dr. Susan Parker, was willing to participate in this event that we've tried to put together. So I now want to introduce Dr. Parker. Susan Parker is the university librarian at the University of British Columbia, and she began her term here in September 2017. She's a member of UBC Vancouver's University Senate, the Senate Library Committee, and the university's Research Data Management Task Force. She represents UBC Library as a member of the Canadian Association of Research Libraries, where she's a member of the board of directors and the policy committee. She also represents UBC Library as a member of the Association of Research Libraries, and the Center for Research Libraries, SPARC, and the Pacific Rim Research Library Alliance. Prior to coming to UBC, Susan Parker held the role of Deputy University Librarian at the University of California, Los Angeles, with responsibilities for strategic and capital projects and planning, assessment, budget, and human resources. She participated in planning, negotiating, and directing shared collection management and licensing activities and committees among the 10 University of California libraries. From 2015 until her departure in 2017 for UBC, she was interim head of UCLA Library's Special Collections and Archives Unit, and also had oversight over the Rosenfeld Library at UCLA's Anderson Graduate School of Management. Her career includes previous leadership positions at California State University, Northridge Library, Tufts University Library, and the Harvard Law School Library. Dr. Parker holds a Bachelor of Arts degree in History and American Literature, a Master of Arts in History, a Master of Library Science with a specialization in academic librarianship, and a PhD in organizational and industrial psychology. She's an active researcher and speaker and a published author with research interests, including leadership in academic libraries and higher education, organization theory, and positivity. Dr. Parker, if you'd like to say a few words on behalf of the UBC library system.
Yes, Handel, thank you so much for that introduction. And I want to say what an honor it is to be here today to share in this occasion and to thank Professor Moodley and Professor Adam for this generous donation of their library to the UBC library and to the CCIE. You've heard about them talk about their lifetime adventures, you know, not just in scholarship, but in real life. And in creating this collection, the care and the love that they've dedicated to this pursuit is something to behold. And, you know, it's a significant legacy that I'm very proud to see we can carry on at UBC as we recognize this commitment by making the books and papers a part of our own collections. Now, I will say that while the UBC library already does have a number of the important books in this collection, and we do have a lot of books on African studies, on apartheid, this is an important addition. This inventory carries our collection further, especially in South African studies and studies related to the Middle East. You know, you've heard the word multiculturalism quite a lot, and it's quite appropriate to make sure that collections that have to do with scholars' particular interests and disciplines also relate to one another across disciplines, across these interdisciplinary kinds of aspects. And so that you can not only study the discipline, study the history, but also put those things together in a way that both the professors have described. Why is it important to the UBC library? I think three things. Once, my wish is for this donation to form the core of what I hope will be developed as a greater and growing African studies collection and resources at UBC library, and also boost our small but similarly growing collection on the Middle East. Both of these areas are simply going to see a lot of growth in course offerings and research in UBC in the coming years. And in order to support this growth, the library will need to provide resources. We do have scholarly journals and books and ebooks about South Africa and the Middle East, but as I said, this adds to them. And the donation helps us move forward with books and other resources like research journals, and sooner than we might otherwise be able to do if we had to rely only on our ability to purchase things. Second, this is a donation, importantly, both to the CCIE and to the UBC library. And I just want to say that I echo, Handel's appreciation of getting together. I hope this will become a fruitful and lasting partnership that we grow between the library and CCIE. And I want to thank you, Handel, for helping to make this a truly joint project. And I also want to wish that this collection and our partnership will simply help to build African studies, Black studies, Middle Eastern studies programs at UBC, and to help bring students, teachers, and scholars together to contribute to that community. The vibrancy that it represents is just a taste of what we've got here today, so I appreciate that. And so I want to thank you, Professor Adam and Professor Moodley, for this rich contribution. And on behalf of the UBC Library, we're deeply grateful. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Susan. I want to end with just a brief take on a few things. Professor Adam and Professor Moodley, they were both around, and then they're now professors emeritus and emerita, and they're still very much around. And sometimes it's interesting where you encounter people. I believe the last time I encountered them face to face, well, there were two other times. The CCIE held a symposium on decolonization, and we had a South African scholar at a South African university. He's actually a Nigerian, as a keynote speaker. And they both were at that event unexpectedly, but very happy to see them. And then I think I was at a conference on multiculturalism all the way in Seoul, Korea. And that was another time that unexpectedly I encountered the two of them at the Korean Association for Multicultural Education in Seoul. So I never know when I'm going to bump into them, but it's usually been a situation where there's been rich discussions. And I guess the occasion of Kogila's latest book was one where this discussion was happening, first around her book. And I said, oh, maybe we can do a book launch or something. She said, oh, there's already been a book launch. Before we knew it, we were discussing. And out of that kind of discussion came this new event for us, which is how to deal with the possibility of this donation. And I really want to thank Susan for also taking this seriously, because it occurred to me that this was a serious and meaningful donation, because UBC could do a lot with addressing Blackness, addressing African studies. We have a long way to go, and the connection between those two. And when I first came to UBC in the early 2000s, what was on the ground was we didn't even have what we now have, which is the African Studies minor. And it was the student group Africa Awareness that agitated for what then became the African Studies minor. And that has remained a very small program, a very precarious program. And I want to say that this kind of collection and what Susan has mentioned as a kind of, this might be a core and impetus for establishing that area with the library. All of that will help for UBC to grow African studies, which I think we need to do. And I would be an advocate for us doing. And to begin to touch, also Susan mentioned African studies in general, and both Kogila and Harry also mentioned that. So how do we grow African studies? Part of it is actually having the text. And I was smiling when Kogila was saying, you can't substitute for, I mean, we read so much online, but having a newspaper in the morning, on a Sunday morning with your coffee and actually turning the pages, reading a book physically. I'm sorry, maybe I'm old school as well. I also think there's no substitute for actual text that we can hold physically. So I just want to say again how grateful we all are for these donations. And I want to thank folks who have, all of you for bringing this together, because we did this in a very short time. And as I said, this is a new event for the CCIE. So I want to thank Dr. Herbert Adam. I want to thank Dr. Kogila-Moodley. I want to thank Dr. Susan Parker. And I also want to thank Dr. Andre Mazawi, who has joined us, who is the head, the chair of the Department of Educational Studies. It's good to have a departmental chair also present with us. And finally, I used to have, working with the center, a very hardworking and independent and an amazing GA called Mary Constanzi. And she has had to step away. And I thought for the life of me, there's nobody who could step into her shoes. I have been proven ever so wrong by Ezra Al-Mufta, who is the new GA for the center. Ezra is doing just absolutely amazing work, and I hope she doesn't blush when I say that. She has helped pull this whole event together and pull all the resources together in record time, working in collaboration with myself. So I don't know if people want to have a few words to say. There are a few members of the audience. If anybody has any thoughts, questions, something you might want to raise with both Kogila and Heribert, or even with Susan, about the library, about their library and the donation, I guess I could open it up for some thoughts or questions.
Dr. Wright,
yes, I think Professor Mazawi has something he wants to say.
Yes,
go ahead, Andre.
If Heribert wants to go first, please.
No, you.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Handel. Thank you, Heribert, Kogila, and Dr. Parker for this opportunity. Handel mentioned my position as head. I would like to say that from the perspective of the head of Department of Educational Studies, this particular dimension, by strengthening the linkages between the Department of Educational Studies, the Center for Culture, Identity, and Education, and the library, creates an amazing synergies between the range of research that is currently taking place in the department, including on questions touching on African education from different countries, and also including on questions of anti-racism, Black studies, more to do with the North American context. But most importantly, I would like to say, what I always appreciated about the scholarship that our esteemed colleague Heribert and Kogila have brought is that they have really wondered, not just within Africa, but I think also in relation to the Middle East context, to try and understand the complexities and multifaceted historical aspects associated with struggles for equality and liberation. And what I appreciate about the scholarship is particularly the fact that while they do draw on their experiences from different contexts, they refer to in their words, they are very particularly meticulous in terms of contextualizing the problematics. And in that sense, I really have great admiration for the kind of drawings that they have put together in different books between the South African context and the Middle East conflict, particularly in Israel and Palestine. This book collection, and that will be my last word actually on this point, this book collection, I said, is an important linkage between the range of scholars who are actively involved in educational studies on the issues pertinent to this collection. And I very much hope that in this way, we can both conceive of the library as both a pan-university service and also as an outlet that is customized and addresses specific needs of particular departments. And in this, I must say, I know firsthand how much Dr. Parker has been really caring about ensuring this kind of partnership. If you want, I've had the honor actually for 2 consecutive years of having Dr. Parker as the main contributor for a course I was teaching on higher education in educational studies, and our students benefited tremendously from the kind of input we benefited from while visiting her at her office. So I'm very, very grateful. I see I see lots of very important potential for research and discussions around issues pertinent to this collection: multiculturalism, African context, national struggles. It's really multifaceted in that sense. And thank you very much again for organizing this, Handel, and thank you to all the contributors and attendees. Much appreciated.
Thanks, Andre.
May I just also thank Andre? When we did our field work in Israel, Andre introduced us to areas and guided us and hosted us in a way which we didn't expect. was extremely generous. He introduced us to Jaffa, to the essence of Palestinian culture, which we would have not had without your guidance and introduction.
Thank you very much.
And the unfortunate conclusion we drew from all the contacts in Israel and Palestine was the conflict is intractable. The idea which the Americans pushed, that a Mandela would solve the conflict, is a fantasy. In the Middle East, the preconditions which existed in South Africa were quite different from what we had experienced there. In both hostile and friendly diaspora, in Israelis being not dependent on Palestinian labor, although they used it, but they were not subject to consequences if Palestinians striked, and so on and so on. We learned in the fieldwork there.
Thanks so much, Harry. Does anybody else have a final word? Or that? So once again, this will be like TV or something. You can't have dead air. So once again, I want to thank everybody for being here. We're grateful for this donation. I think everybody has said, and I'm grateful to everybody for contributing to what for the CCIE was a first. This not only the event, but even the idea of what might emerge out of this, which is that the center itself will now house, and this is a wonderful contribution to that, a small library of its own. I'm sure Susan will appreciate the idea of micro libraries arising in different spaces. So we will host some of the texts, and we're very, very grateful for this set of texts that will come the way of the CCIE. That will be the beginning of generating the Center for Cultural Identity and Education's own little library, because we have visitors, visiting scholars, and visiting international research students from across the world. And it will be good for them to have access to some of those texts directly in the CCIE space. So that's something I'm also very excited about. So on that note, I want to thank everybody again, and especially Ezra again, and let us all keep in touch. And Dr. Parker, yes, we will be in touch. And I know that Kogila and Harry, you'll be traveling soon. So we wish you safe travels, and we hope you'll remain in touch once you come back. So all the best to everybody, and thanks to everybody for attending and making this such a lively and interesting discussion and event. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye all.
Thank you.